My name is Daniel Carter, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, my older brother Ryan has been the loudest voice in every room, the self-declared golden child of our family. He's 3 years older than me, and growing up, he never let me forget it. While I quietly worked on science fair projects and devoured books about space and design, he was the high school quarterback, the prom king, and later the charismatic marketing director at a Fortune 500 company. Everyone in our family treated his opinions like gospel, including when he mocked my quiet nature and my unconventional dreams. For Ryan, life was about big wins and flashy appearances. For me, it was about building something meaningful, something lasting. And yet, no matter what I did, I always felt like the awkward footnote to his shining headline. Have you ever had someone take credit for your hard work? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit home, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support means everything. I had always known I was different. I was never the center of attention, never the one cracking jokes at family dinners or charming distant relatives at weddings. I was the one helping clean up afterward, the one listening more than speaking. And I was fine with that. But Ryan didn't see it that way. To him, my reserved demeanor was a sign of weakness. I still remember the words he said at our cousin Leah's engagement party 2 years ago, when my mother asked if I was seeing anyone. "Daniel? He'll die single," he'd said, laughing into his champagne. "He needs a personality first." Everyone at the table laughed along, except me. I just swallowed the hurt and smiled tightly, as always. What no one at that table knew, not even Ryan, was that I had already met someone. Someone who made every cruel jab and dismissive laugh fade into the background. Her name was Amara Patel, a fiercely intelligent, hilarious, and stunningly beautiful filmmaker I'd met at a tech conference. We had bonded over our mutual love for 90s cinema and obscure coffee blends, and what started as a friendly exchange of ideas quickly evolved into something deeper. She wasn't impressed by flashy resumes or family legacies. She cared about authenticity, about depth. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not as Ryan's quieter brother, but as a man worthy of love on his own terms. Amara and I kept our relationship quiet at first. Not out of shame, but out of protection. I had seen how judgmental and dismissive my family could be, especially Ryan, and I didn't want their cynicism tainting something so pure. But as the months turned into a year, it became harder to stay silent. Amara's work was gaining national attention, her short film on immigrant identity having just won a major award. Meanwhile, the startup I had quietly co-founded 3 years ago, an AI-driven storytelling platform, was gaining traction in the tech world, and we had just secured our second round of funding. For once, I wasn't just surviving in Ryan's shadow. I was thriving. Still, Ryan didn't know. At least, not until Thanksgiving last year. That evening, the whole family had gathered at my parents' home in upstate New York. The air smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, and the living room buzzed with overlapping conversations and clinking glasses. Ryan arrived late, wearing a designer coat and greeting everyone like he was stepping onto a stage. When he finally turned to me, he offered the same half-smile he always did, the one that said, "You still haven't caught up, little brother." After the usual pleasantries, he leaned in and asked, "Still fiddling with that hobby of yours? The storytelling thing?" I smiled. "Actually, it's grown quite a bit. We've got major investors now. We're scaling fast." He laughed and clapped me on the back. "Well, good for you. Just remember, most of those things fail in 5 years. But hey, keep dreaming." I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell him how Amara's latest film was being optioned by Netflix, or how a major venture capital firm had just offered us $10 million in Series B funding. But something held me back. Maybe years of conditioning, maybe fear of sounding boastful. I just nodded and changed the subject. The tension peaked later that night. After dinner. My aunt had asked when I planned to settle down. Ryan, clearly a few glasses of wine in, laughed again. "Settle down? Come on, Daniel's probably building a robot girlfriend in his basement." Everyone laughed again. It was like high school all over. Except this time, I wasn't the same quiet kid they remembered. What Ryan didn't realize, what none of them did, is that I had gotten engaged to Amara 2 weeks earlier. She had said yes on a foggy morning in San Francisco, where I had proposed to her on the same park bench where we first talked about life and love. We hadn't announced it yet because we wanted to enjoy the moment privately. But standing there in the living room that night, surrounded by laughter at my expense, I realized I was done playing small. That night, I didn't lash out or argue. I simply smiled to myself, knowing that soon enough, the narrative would change. They would all see me differently. Not because I needed their approval, but because they had built their expectations on outdated assumptions. Ryan's words, "You'll die single," would soon echo with irony so loud it couldn't be ignored. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Someone who thought they had you figured out, only to discover they never really knew you at all? If so, tell me your story in the comments below. I want to hear from people who rose above the noise to define themselves. And if this story resonates with you so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens next? You won't want to miss it. The days after Thanksgiving passed in a blur, but my mind kept replaying Ryan's mocking voice, the way he always assumed my life was a caricature of isolation and failure. He had no idea I was engaged, no clue that the so-called robot builder had just landed a deal with the top AI investors on the West Coast. But it wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity. I didn't want to throw my achievements in his face. I wanted my presence, my life to speak for itself. And that moment was closer than he could possibly imagine. Amara and I had been planning a formal engagement announcement for months. Her film was premiering at a high-profile gala in Los Angeles the following week, and I had been invited as her guest of honor. Normally, Ryan would never care about such an event. Art wasn't his scene. But this time, the gala was being sponsored by a media conglomerate his company had recently partnered with, and executives from his circle would be there. In fact, he was scheduled to speak on a panel the same night. We were both headed into the same room. Only he didn't know yet that we were walking in as equals. As we boarded the flight to LA, Amara noticed the tension in my shoulders. "Still thinking about your brother?" she asked gently. I smiled faintly. "It's not just about him. It's about how many years I spent letting him write my story." She leaned her head against mine. "Then rewrite it. They're not the authors, you are." We arrived in LA the day before the gala and checked into a stunning downtown hotel. The city buzzed with anticipation for the event. Photographers setting up, guests flying in from around the country, and media outlets publishing previews of the weekend schedule. I looked at the official itinerary and saw both our names listed. Amara Patel, headliner for the film showcase, and Daniel Carter, CTO and co-founder of Verity Labs, panelist for the Tech and Storytelling Roundtable. I stared at it for a long moment. There it was, validation not just from a stage or a paycheck, but from a world that had seen what I built and called it valuable. It wasn't about outshining Ryan anymore. It was about walking into that room and knowing I belonged. The gala arrived like a cinematic dream. Amara wore a silver sari embroidered with black thread that shimmered under the chandeliers, and I wore the deep blue tailored suit she had picked for me weeks ago. As we entered the grand ballroom, cameras clicked, people turned, and for the first time, I was not the plus one. I was someone they already recognized. I was part of the story. I hadn't seen Ryan yet, but I knew he was coming. His panel was scheduled just after mine, and sure enough, as we exited the side stage after our roundtable discussion, during which I'd explained the mechanics of emotion-driven AI modeling and received a roaring applause, Ryan walked in. The expression on his face when he saw me standing beside the moderator, shaking hands with producers, was one I'll never forget. His smile faltered just slightly before he composed himself, but his eyes gave him away. Confusion, surprise, and something else too, discomfort. He was not the center this time. He wasn't the one being introduced or celebrated. For once, he had walked into my space. I stepped forward and offered a calm smile. "Hey Ryan. Didn't expect to see you here so soon." He blinked, clearly trying to recalibrate. "Daniel, wow. Didn't realize you were involved in this event." I gestured toward Amara, who was speaking with a group of reporters nearby. Amara's the featured director. Her film opens the showcase. I didn't say my fiancé. Not yet. I wanted him to process this on his own. He glanced between me and her, recognition dawning. "Wait. That's Amara Patel? The one everyone's talking about." I nodded. "We've been together for nearly 2 years. Engaged now." I didn't say it boastfully. Just honestly. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. For the first time in years, Ryan looked stunned. Not because I had said anything cutting or superior, but because everything he had assumed about my life had just unraveled before him in seconds. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "You never said anything." I shrugged gently. "You never asked." The rest of the evening unfolded like a perfect storm of reversal. At the reception, people stopped me to ask about my company's next innovation. Amara was pulled aside for interviews, and we were photographed together as a couple. And Ryan? He watched from the sidelines, politely clapping but noticeably quieter than usual. Later, I overheard one of the sponsors asking him if he knew me well. "Yeah," he had replied slowly. "That's my brother." That was the moment. Not when he mocked me years ago. Not when I started the company. Not even when Amara said yes. That was the moment I felt the power shift. Not in a way that sought revenge, but in a way that simply said, "You were wrong about me. And that's okay. Because I was always right to believe in myself." I'd love to know. Have you ever had a moment where someone underestimated you and you finally had the chance to show them who you really are? Let me know in the comments. And if this story hits home, like and subscribe for more stories of self-worth and quiet victories. We're just getting started. The following morning brought with it a sense of reflection I hadn't anticipated. Amara and I sat on the balcony of our hotel suite, sipping coffee as the sun rose over the city skyline. The previous night still felt surreal. How smoothly everything had unfolded, how Ryan had been forced to confront the reality of who I had become. But more than that, it stirred something deeper. The realization that I didn't need to fight for his recognition anymore. I already had it, whether he could articulate it or not. Still, the moment lingered in my mind, the look in his eyes, the shift in his demeanor when he said, "That's my brother." It wasn't pride, not quite. It was a grappling with the truth. The weight of his own assumptions being dismantled right there in that grand ballroom. And yet, despite all that, I felt no sense of triumph. Just peace. We flew home that afternoon. Amara had a few interviews lined up, and I had a board meeting with our new partners. The weeks that followed moved quickly, filled with product launches, development milestones, and preparations for our wedding. Yet amidst all the progress and excitement, one thing stood out like a quiet question waiting to be answered. Would Ryan reach out? Then, one Tuesday evening as I left my office, my phone buzzed with a message. "Dinner sometime? Just us. I owe you that much." It was from Ryan. I stared at the screen, surprised not that he had messaged, but by the tone. There was no sarcasm, no condescension, just a simple invitation. Part of me hesitated, unsure of his motives. But a larger part of me knew this was the next step. Not for revenge, not to gloat, but to rebuild. We met at a restaurant midway between our homes. Neutral ground. When I arrived, Ryan was already seated, a bottle of wine uncorked, 2 glasses poured. He stood up as I approached, something he hadn't done for me since college. The gesture, small as it was, said more than words. "Daniel," he greeted, voice measured. "You look good, man." "You too," I replied, shaking his hand. For a while, we talked like strangers trying to remember how to be brothers. He asked about Verity Labs, about Amara's upcoming projects. I asked about his consultancy, the merger he was brokering. But it was all surface. Comfortable, polite, even warm. Yet I knew we were both circling something deeper. Finally, as the plates were cleared and the waiter refilled our glasses, Ryan leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "I owe you an apology," he said plainly. "Not just for what I said that day at Mom's, though that was awful. But for years. Years of treating you like you were beneath me." I said nothing, letting him continue. "I don't know when it started," he said, eyes distant. "Maybe because I was older, or because our parents always pushed you toward me. But somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing you as your own person. I kept thinking you were just trailing behind, never realizing you'd been building something bigger than I could even understand." It was strange, hearing Ryan admit fault, not in a defensive way, but with a humility I hadn't seen in him since we were kids. "You know," he added with a faint smile, "people at the gala were talking about your work like it was something out of science fiction. That whole AI emotional mapping thing blew my mind." I chuckled softly. "Yeah, it's been an interesting ride." I chuckled softly. "Yeah, it's been an interesting ride." He nodded. "I guess I always assumed you were too quiet, too reserved to do something groundbreaking. I never stopped to think that maybe that was your strength. That sentence lodged in my chest, because it was the exact opposite of everything he'd ever said before. For so long, he had equated volume with value, bravado with brilliance. But now he saw it. He finally saw me. I appreciate that, I said. It's not about being better than you. It never was. I just wanted to do something meaningful. He swirled his wine, thoughtful. I get that now. And I want to be better about showing up. For you. For Amara too. You guys are building something incredible together. I don't want to be the bitter brother on the sidelines. It was a turning point, not just in our relationship but in how I saw myself in it. 4 years, I had defined my journey by his absence of support, by his judgment. Now I could finally let go of that weight. As we parted outside the restaurant, Ryan hesitated before pulling me into a brief but genuine hug. Congratulations again, man, he said. You really proved me wrong. I smiled. That was never the goal. But thanks. He stepped back, hands in his coat pockets. I'll see you at the wedding? You'd better be there. That night, I returned home to Amara and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. Do you feel lighter? She asked. I paused, then nodded. Yeah, I really do. There was no grand confrontation, no explosive moment of reckoning, just quiet acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's more powerful than anything else. Let me know if you've ever had a moment like that, where someone who once doubted you finally came around. Drop it in the comments. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. We share real stories here. Stories that matter. The wedding day arrived bathed in sunlight and calm. For once, it felt like life had quieted enough to let joy fully bloom. Amara stood by the mirror in our suite, her gown glowing ivory against the soft gold of the morning. I watched her in quiet awe, not just for how beautiful she looked, but for how steady she had been through it all. Through the doubts, the tensions with Ryan, the storm of building a startup and planning a wedding simultaneously. She had anchored me with grace. And now, we were about to begin the next chapter. Not just as business partners or lovers, but as husband and wife. The ceremony was held at the Botanical Conservatory just outside the city, a place Amara had always loved. Rows of friends and family filled the glasshouse, surrounded by ferns and climbing roses. Even Ryan sat there, front row, dressed neatly in navy and surprisingly at ease. I noticed how he leaned forward during the vows, how he smiled, genuinely, when I took Amara's hand. It wasn't the smirk of a man pretending to approve. It was pride. And in that moment, it felt like the last pieces of distance between us were finally closing. After the ceremony and photos, we made our way to the reception hall. Everything sparkled, crystal glasses, linen-draped tables, strings of lights overhead. Amara and I barely got through the dinner before the DJ ushered us into the first dance. I held her close, our steps slow and familiar, the song wrapping around us like a quiet promise. I had never believed in perfect moments, but that night came close. And then the toast. Ryan took the microphone toward the end of the evening, a champagne flute in one hand, a look of quiet composure on his face. I know, he began, glancing at the crowd, that most people didn't expect to hear a speech from me tonight. Least of all the groom. The crowd chuckled lightly, and I tensed, wondering if he was about to slide into sarcasm. But his tone shifted. Daniel and I didn't always see eye to eye, he continued. In fact, 4 years, I saw him as my little brother who never quite caught up. I measured success in titles and salaries. I thought being louder meant being more right. And I was wrong. Silence fell over the room. He turned to face me directly. Daniel, I watched you build something incredible. Not just a company, not just a partnership, but a life that reflects the strength I never saw before. That was my mistake. I underestimated you. I wasn't prepared for the emotion that welled up. It caught me off guard, the weight of his words slicing through years of tension like sunlight through fog. Tonight, he said, raising his glass, I don't toast my brother because he married an extraordinary woman, though he did. I toast him because he became an extraordinary man. One I'm proud to call family. Everyone stood. Applause filled the hall. I stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the transformation I had just witnessed. Not just in his words, but in his face. He meant every syllable. Later that night, as guests began to leave and the lights dimmed, Ryan found me at the edge of the dance floor. We didn't say much at first, just exchanged a long, knowing look. "You didn't have to say all that," I told him. He nodded. "I did. For you and for me." We walked out onto the terrace where the night air was cool, stars faint behind the city's glow. "I kept thinking this would be hard," he admitted. "Admitting I was wrong. Watching you succeed. But it's not. Not anymore." "Why not?" I asked. He shrugged, folding his arms. "Because now I know that your success doesn't take anything away from me." That wasn't always clear to me. There it was. The unspoken rivalry that had shaped our entire relationship. Finally spoken. And with that admission, the final wedge between us broke loose. "You know," he added with a grin, "you married someone way out of your league." "Trust me," I laughed. "I'm very aware." We both chuckled, and for the first time in years, the laughter felt natural. Not forced or polite or buried under unspoken resentment. It felt like brothers laughing again. As the night wound down and Amara and I prepared to leave, I looked around the hall. At our family, our friends, the legacy we were beginning to build. Everything had changed, not because I'd won something, but because I'd finally stopped needing to prove anything. I had let my work speak for itself. I had let love lead me forward. And it had brought me to this moment. When Ryan hugged me goodbye, it wasn't stiff or quick. It lingered, an embrace full of unspoken things. Apologies. Admiration. Maybe even love. "I'll see you soon," he said. "I'm counting on it." And with that, the chapter that began with his scorn had ended with his blessing. The days after our wedding settled into a peaceful rhythm, one I hadn't expected but deeply cherished. Amara and I returned from our short honeymoon to find not only our home waiting for us but something more unexpected. Stability, acceptance, and an entirely new relationship with my brother. Where once there had been awkward phone calls and tense family dinners, now there was regular conversation, even occasional collaboration. For the first time in my life, I felt like my family actually saw me. Not the version they imagined I should be, but the person I had become. About a week after we returned, I was in my home office reviewing a new investment offer when Ryan called. He rarely phoned in the morning unless something was important. "You busy?" he asked. "Kind of," I replied. "But what's up?" "I'm outside," he said. I blinked. "You're what?" "Outside. Your house. I figured we should talk in person." True to his word, he was standing there when I opened the door, holding 2 coffees. There was a nervous energy about him. Not anxious, but unsure. I hadn't seen that side of him since we were kids. I led him inside and we sat on the patio, the spring breeze making the leaves whisper around us. "I've been thinking," he said, setting his cup down. "I want to invest." I raised an eyebrow. "In the company?" "In you," he clarified. "In whatever you're building next. I've been watching closely, Daniel. You're not just running a startup. You've created something people trust. Clients, investors, your team. Even me." I sat back, surprised. For so long, our dynamic had been defined by comparison. This was something new. Something rare. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I finally understand what makes a good leader," he said. "And it's not just results or numbers or charisma. It's vision. Consistency. Trust. I used to think I had all that. But you've been quietly showing me what that really looks like." It was one of the most honest admissions I'd ever heard from him. I considered his offer carefully, not just as a brother but as a businessman. "I appreciate that. And if we do this, it'll be a clean slate. You won't be investing as my brother. You'll be doing it as a partner. That comes with expectations." "I know," he nodded. "And I'm ready." We shook hands right there, not with fanfare or ceremony, but with mutual respect. The contract came later, but the moment of trust was sealed that morning. And somehow, it meant more than any formal agreement could have. Later that month, we held a strategy retreat for our leadership team. An idea Amara had championed. It was the first time our entire executive circle had come together in person since the company's inception. Ryan joined as an observer, though it quickly became clear he had more to contribute than expected. His experience in scaling operations proved valuable. He offered insights without ego, suggested ideas without demanding ownership. The team respected him, not for who he was related to, but for what he brought to the table. Amara noticed the shift too. That evening, as we wrapped up the first day of sessions, she leaned over to me and whispered, "He's changed." "I know," I whispered back. "So have we." The most powerful part of that retreat wasn't the whiteboard sessions or the planning exercises. It was the dinner conversation. At one point, someone asked how the company got started, and all eyes turned to me. I shared the story, not the cleaned-up investor pitch, but the real version. How I had been discouraged, doubted. How Amara had believed in me when no one else did. How every milestone came with uncertainty. How the company almost didn't survive its first 6 months. There were no tears, no dramatics, just truth. When I finished, Ryan raised his glass and simply said, "Now that's a story worth building around." It felt like closure. And a new beginning all at once. Weeks passed, and with them, new clients signed on. One major deal came directly through a referral from Ryan's old network. "Used to be I wouldn't have vouched for you," he admitted. "Now I won't vouch for anyone else." We were sitting in the same office he once mocked me for working in, the one he called, "my little corner of ambition." It had been redesigned since, larger now, sunlit, filled with the quiet energy of focus and purpose. A framed photo of our wedding sat on the bookshelf, next to a signed agreement from one of our earliest clients. And next to that, a plaque commemorating the industry award Amara and I had won together for innovation. Ryan's eyes landed on that plaque. "You really did it," he said. "We did it," I corrected him. He shook his head. "No. You led. I followed." It was the simplest sentence, yet the most powerful confirmation of how far we had come. Not just as professionals. As brothers. The summer that followed our company's expansion marked not just growth in numbers, but a deeper evolution in our personal lives. What had begun as a desperate attempt to prove myself had transformed into something stable, something rich in meaning. Our team doubled in size, our revenue tripled, and the story of how the founder's brother once claimed credit had become an almost mythic cautionary tale shared in private startup circles. But for us, the real story was about what came after. The quiet rebuilding of relationships and the surprising beauty of second chances. One Saturday morning, I found myself walking through the local farmer's market with Amara. Her hand was tucked in mine, and the sun spilled through the leafy trees above us, casting soft shadows over booths of fresh produce and homemade crafts. As we browsed, a middle-aged woman from a local newspaper approached us. She recognized Amara, not because of me, but because of her growing platform as a speaker and writer on women in leadership. The woman asked for a quote about her most meaningful personal victory. "Without hesitating," Amara said, "helping my husband become the man he was always meant to be." That stayed with me. Not just because it was touching but because it was true. For so long I had been trying to meet expectations that didn't align with who I really was. I was so busy trying to earn approval that I nearly forgot what I was capable of when I followed my own voice. And it was Amara, not my brother, not my parents, not any investor, who saw that voice clearly from the beginning. That same week, we were invited to speak at a university business symposium. Amara for her leadership initiatives, and me as a case study in startup resilience. As I stood on stage, facing an audience of eager students and young entrepreneurs, I noticed a familiar face in the front row, Ryan. He wasn't just attending to be supportive, he was genuinely interested, notebook in hand, scribbling down ideas. And when the Q&A session opened, he raised his hand and asked, "What advice would you give to someone who took too long to believe in someone they love?" The room chuckled gently, not entirely sure whether it was a hypothetical question. I smiled and answered truthfully. I'd say it's never too late to start believing, as long as the belief is real. Later, we went out for dinner together. Just the two of us. Brothers, business partners, and now, finally, equals. Over plates of sushi and glasses of sake, he told me something that hit harder than I expected. "I used to think your success made me look bad," he said. "Now I realize your success makes us all look better. It sets the standard. It reminds me what real work and leadership look like." That same night, he gave me something else. An envelope. Inside was a copy of the original pitch deck he had presented to investors using my concept years ago. On it, he had written a note. "I kept this to remind myself of what I did. I'm giving it to you now as proof that I'm done hiding from it." I didn't need the paper. I had already forgiven him. But the gesture mattered more than I could explain. Our family dynamic also shifted in the wake of everything that had unfolded. Our parents, once distant and often dismissive, became more involved, not just out of obligation, but with genuine interest. My father asked thoughtful questions during family dinners. My mother praised Amara not just for being a supportive wife, but for her own achievements. It was as if, by seeing me clearly for the first time, they had unlocked a new level of understanding for the rest of the world around them. One particularly moving moment came during a quiet evening at our home. Ryan and our parents had come over for dinner, and after dessert, my father stood up holding a wine glass and said, "To Daniel, the son who taught me that success isn't about the loudest voice in the room, it's about the most consistent one." The silence that followed was profound. Even Amara looked surprised. Ryan raised his glass next, and for the first time in our adult lives, I felt no rivalry, no hidden competition, only shared respect. Professionally, things continued to ascend. We were invited to partner on a major national infrastructure project, and Amara was asked to speak at TEDx. She asked me to help write her talk. That night, after reading her speech draft, a deeply personal narrative about partnership, ambition, and love, I sat back and realized how far we'd come. There had been so many versions of me. The quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who was told he'd die single and unremarkable. Now I stood as a husband, a founder, and a leader in every sense of the word. I no longer needed to prove anything, to Ryan, to my family, or even to myself. I simply had to keep living the truth we had fought so hard to build. Perhaps the most powerful moment of all came not in front of a crowd, but alone on the rooftop of our office one evening. I stood there, watching the city lights flicker on, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The startup that had once lived only in my head was now alive in the world. The love that had once felt impossible was now my anchor. And the brother I had once resented was now my ally. The past couldn't be erased. But it had been rewritten, not by revenge or resentment, but by choice. By rebuilding. By believing. In the end, what remained wasn't the bitterness or betrayal. It wasn't the sting of being overshadowed or the frustration of having my voice dismissed for years. What remained was the journey. The proof that self-worth isn't granted, it's claimed. That lesson unfolded slowly for me, but once it did, it changed everything. Growing up, I believed success had to be loud. I thought validation came from others. Parents, siblings, peers, or people in power. I thought love had to be earned through perfection, and that silence equaled weakness. I carried those beliefs like weights, never realizing they weren't truths but burdens I could put down. The moment I did, the transformation began. Not externally at first, not with a headline, a viral moment, or a big public comeback, but internally, where it mattered most. The moral of my story isn't about revenge or dramatic twists. It's about reclaiming your story before someone else writes the ending for you. For too long, I had let my brother narrate our shared past. He told the world what I wasn't. He took the credit, built the image and shaped the narrative, and I let him. Not because I was weak but because I believed somewhere deep down that maybe he was right. That I wasn't enough. But here's what I've learned. When you're underestimated long enough, you develop a superpower, clarity. You learn who you are when no one's watching, when no one's clapping. That solitude carves out something honest in you. So when my moment finally came, when the investors walked into my office and saw the truth with their own eyes, I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to say, "I told you so." My work did it for me. My integrity spoke volumes. And the impact was lasting. This isn't just about a startup. It's about the quiet builder inside all of us, the one who keeps going despite being dismissed, ignored, or overshadowed. The one who dreams silently while others boast loudly. If that's you, let me tell you something. Your silence is not weakness. It's strength waiting for the right moment. When you step into your own light, not borrowed, not stolen, not handed down, but fully yours, everything begins to change. What my brother did hurt me, yes. It changed how I viewed trust, family, even ambition. But it also gave me a choice. I could spend years chasing his apology, or I could build something undeniable. I chose the latter. And in doing so, something strange and beautiful happened. I got the apology anyway. Not just in words but in actions. In changed behavior. In recognition. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's deciding that the past no longer has the power to define your worth. I forgave Ryan, not to excuse what he did, but because holding on to that weight was costing me too much peace. And as surprising as it may sound, I'm grateful for what happened. Because without it, I might still be waiting for someone else to tell me who I am. Instead, I've become the author of my own story. And Amara, my wife, the person my brother once mocked me for dreaming of, has become my partner in every chapter. She saw me before I saw myself. That's love, real love. Not a trophy or validation, but a mirror that reflects who you're capable of becoming. To those of you listening or reading this and nodding silently because you've been there too, underestimated, overlooked or stolen from, I want you to know, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not powerless. Your story doesn't end at the moment of betrayal. That's just where the real arc begins. And if you stay with it, if you keep showing up, doing the work, believing in yourself even when no one else does, you will reach a moment where everything changes. And when it does, you won't need to scream it from the rooftops. The people who once doubted you will see it. They'll feel it in the way you carry yourself, in the rooms you command, in the silence that follows your confidence. You'll stop needing their approval, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally seen yourself clearly. The real win isn't proving them wrong. It's living in such a way that you no longer need to. I used to want applause. Now I want peace. I used to crave validation. Now, I value alignment. And perhaps most importantly, I've learned that the people who try to steal your light can only do so if you forget that it comes from within. So here's my question for you. Has someone ever taken credit for your work, your ideas, or your dream? How did you respond? Did you shrink, or did you rise? Tell me in the comments, because your story, like mine, has power. And maybe, just maybe, your story will help someone else find the courage to speak up, to rebuild, or to finally claim their worth. If this story resonated with you, if you saw a piece of yourself in it, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who's still waiting to be seen. Let them know their time is coming. And remember this. You are not defined by the people who overlook you. You are defined by the choices you make after they do. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. And most of all, thank you for becoming the author of your own story.